Well, welcome friends here on this rainy and blustery day. Somewhat fitting for our readings today, because we had a fun few set of readings. We had Jesus stilling the storms, that amazing read which we all know pretty well and offers reassurance in the midst of the chaos. But perhaps that preach is a little bit predictable. We had the psalm which the choir sung so beautifully, a drama at sea. We see crashing and bashing, God saving. And we also then had the reading from 2 Corinthians, an eyes on stalks sort of a list of disasters and calamities that have befallen Paul as he is going about proclaiming the gospel. What a choice of Sunday scriptures. Calamity, disaster, pain, fear. We have 2 that explicitly mention the ability of God to overcome, to bring peace in the chaos, security, assurance. Just what we need in these COVID times. So naturally, I chose to do the other one. And in doing so, I have found God challenging me about my life and perhaps our life corporately as followers of Jesus. In the section of 2 Corinthians we heard, we see Paul making himself vulnerable, seeking to promote his credentials, if you like, of apostleship to the people of Corinth, to give validity, to urge them to listen to him, so that they may not succumb to the false teachers, but may be faithful to Christ. Well, Paul does so in what frankly is a bit of a weird and unorthodox way, not boasting in his might, wisdom and achievements, but rather giving a prolonged list of the challenges he has faced. Just in case you missed them from the first reading, here are the challenges he lists. The reading says this, it says, "We have commended ourselves in every way, through great endurance, in afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labours, sleepless nights, hunger." To his defence, he does go on to offer some positive qualities, but then he goes at it again when he says, "We are treated as impostors and yet are true, as unknown and yet are well known, as dying and yet see, we are still here, alive, as punished and yet not killed, as sorrowful yet rejoicing, as poor yet making many rich, as nothing yet possessing everything." That's a pretty big list. Now, I'm not sure he really knows how to win people over. This may be the real deal, unable to endure SAS levels of punishment, but I'm not quite sure that would win that many people over. Sure, for us, with the benefit of hindsight, seeing the outcomes, we might read this as a list of virtues of this great man of faith, that he's able to keep us going, that we can be amazed by his perseverance and sacrifice, the superhuman faithfulness of God. But I wonder how weird and unpopular this must have seemed to those of his time, who were not sure of the outcome. You see, the risk levels are sky high. The status benefit is almost non-existent. And so why would this sort of a CV win many over? Certainly, I don't think I would have found this job had I listed such things on mine. The thing I most liken it to, I think, as I explored how this might feel, is the fact that as well as working here in the cathedral, my wife and I are foster carers. And I think this gives some picture of the reaction they may have had. Because people often ask me whether I enjoy fostering. And I pretty much always answer with yes, I absolutely love it. But then closely follow it with, it is demanding, totally consumes your life, brings untold scrutiny, numerous calamities, huge stresses, and complete exhaustion. But seriously, it is amazing and life-giving. People normally, in that circumstance, look at me as if I am from a different planet. They often say something like, "Oh, that's so wonderful that you would welcome children into your lives. They're very lucky to have you." I'm not sure they are, but it is good to have them. But when they say that, their eyes often give them away. You often get the glint in the eye that says, "You are completely mad. What on earth are you doing? Good for you, but that's something I am not interested in at all." I think that might have been some of the reaction that the Apostle Paul got when expressing his CV, so to speak. You see, but Paul is making himself vulnerable in expressing himself in this way. He knows he might face rejection. We know this because he goes on to say, "Our heart is open wide for you. There is no restriction in our affections, but only in yours." He risks the negative reaction, the rejections, to compel the reader to journey deeper, so as to open the door onto something that is so enormous, so world-changing, so transformative, that he would endure it all to share the message. You see, I think this is what it means for Paul to follow the crucified Messiah, to have his whole life changed by something, someone so awesome that it is worth giving it all. And it got me thinking, how does the life of Paul impact us as modern-day believers? Many of us know the reality that following Christ is not a golden ticket to the good life. It does not reduce stress or pain. We still experience the highs and lows of the world. But following Christ causes us to assess every aspect of our lives, to assess whether we are walking in his paths. For Paul, this meant giving it all in the assurance of the faithfulness of God. I wonder, what might it mean for you? Paul, as he describes himself in this passage, perhaps could not be further from our current position in this country. Pandemic aside, we live in relative safety. As a nation and as individuals, when we look on a global scale, we have enormous affluence, wealth, influence, privilege. We live much of our time with the assurance of peace and tolerance, and I thank God for that. But because of this, I wonder, does the gospel of Christ look a bit like that too? Safe, wealthy, perhaps nondescript. As I read Paul in this passage, I thought that this was perhaps a reminder to us that we should not settle for the status quo, but push into the space that feels on the edge, a place where we are prepared to take risks, where we make a stand for things such as social justice, even if that causes appropriate conflict and confrontation, where we see things like the treatment of refugees and asylum seekers, and we stand up and say, this is not right, particularly as we come to the close of Refugee Week, where we go to the many places that feel uncomfortable for the sake of sharing the gospel. In his sermon last week, my friend and colleague Canon Robert said that the hymn Onward Christian Soldiers was probably not high on our list of hymns to sing when we can once again sing together. And in some ways, I agree. The war imagery perhaps not too helpful. But maybe we should be reframing the sense that it has. The sense of Christians going out, an encouragement of risk-taking, of courage, if you like, onward Christian adventurers. The reality is the church is shrinking. It is losing younger generations. And I suggest to you that this is not because of a loss of the potency of the sacrifice of Christ, but it is rather that we have forgotten how to have courage in sharing and communicating his life-giving love in relevant ways in uncomfortable situations. Perhaps this passage challenges us to shake off our comfortable Christianity, to dare greatly, to head to the uncomfortable places, both physically and metaphorically, in the service of Christ. The missiologist and theologian Alan Hirsch puts it like this: we must be willing to dream again, to innovate, and to risk rejection of peers who think that the status quo is sufficient to the task. The church should be one of the most adventurous places on earth, the locus of all quest, the highly adaptive Jesus community at the forefront of what God is doing in the world. I think if we are to fully embrace this risk-taking courage, this life of adventure, the calling upon us is to draw ever closer as individuals and as a community to the person of Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life, the Alpha and Omega, beginning and end. For he is the one who guides us, who shapes us, who transforms us. This Jesus, the Christ, crucified Messiah, is worth it all. He was worth it all for Paul. He was worth it all for the disciples. He was worth it all for the early church. He is still worth it all for us now. So I encourage you, let us live lives that reflect that truth to the world. Amen.